Well, we're on. Good morning. This is another God story, I think number 3. We've got everybody up this morning. We've got, he even woke up for a God story this morning. So it's going to be a good morning. We've got Susan and Allie. And so I was trying to look over the last story that I spoke last week, and I believe we ended up where Jesus met me in the hotel room. Well, I was thinking about it last night, and I was thinking about it this morning on what the next one to share, and I would think the next one would be my next trip, my next golf trip out. I went to a golf tournament again, and of course that was the next week, and I went to the range to hit balls, and I started hitting them really well again, and of course got out on the tee, and again I forgot how to play golf, and it started all over again, and I was stripped in public again. And of course, I think you remember I wanted to blame it on the Lord when they asked me. They said, the tour players were asking me if there was something wrong with me, and the Lord said, don't blame this on me. This is something you sowed in public, so you have to reap it in public. So everything that I was getting stripped of in public are things that I actually reaped, or I actually sowed. So I was having to reap it, And, of course, that's a lot of reaping for the next 2 years. I ended up getting stripped pretty much for almost 2 years, publicly, even having to go through other things, which we'll talk about later. People I had to go to that I ended up having to confess to, and man, it was rough. But the rougher it got, the greater of the visitation there would be. And later on, I started seeing that there was a correlation to this, that the greater the trial that I'd go through, the greater the visitation from the Lord would be. And it got to a point toward the end of those 2 years that I started getting excited about, the visitations. He's over here digging. But I started getting excited about the trials because I knew I was going to get a great visitation. But anyway, I ended up. Let's go to the next story. I went to the next tournament. Went out and hit balls. Of course, I played well hitting balls, practicing, but I forgot again. It lifted off of me. I got stripped down again in public. People talking weird about me. People saying bad things about me, and I went back crying, but it wasn't as bad as it was the last time because I started understanding that, I just had to, take what was happening to me. The Lord was really saving my life. All the sin and the stuff that I had sowed had caught up with me, and that's another thing. There are times and seasons where there's a harvest, and the things that you sow will eventually catch up with you, whether you like it or not. Whether they be good things or they be bad things, they will catch up with you. And God's not going to do anything about that because it's things that we sowed that actually start to spring up in our life. And when it's time of harvest, man, I tell you, that's the time where all your seeds come into fruition, whether they be good seed or bad seed. But sometimes you can use those things that you sowed even in the bad to really, it can get you to a point to where you start repenting back to the Lord and asking for help. And then he starts giving you understanding of how you lived, or how to live with him. So anyway, after I played, my round badly, I got in my car. I went to get in my car, and instead of going to the hotel room, the Lord told me to go to this restaurant. And you got to understand, I was young back then, or younger, and I was in my 20s or late 20s, and when he gave me this vision, I saw this vision of this restaurant, the name of it, and it kind of shocked me because I wasn't used to that kind of things. I didn't know that was called the prophetic, and so I thought, well, I've just got to trust this vision. And so I started to drive out of the country club, and then he told me the street that I'm supposed to turn on. And so he gave me the name of it. And so I kept driving and kept looking for the name. I was a little bit nervous because, I was listening to a voice and trying to believe in what it was telling me in these names of these streets. And of course, your mind goes, man, I'm losing my mind. This is crazy. I'm glad nobody's here to watch me do this because I'd be like a fool. But I was keep driving, and sure enough, that street came up. Well, I got a little bit excited, and so I turned left on that street and went down a little ways. He told me the next street, and then I saw that next street, and I turned down it, and it led to a highway, and a small highway. It wasn't like an interstate, but it took me down this small highway, and the Lord said the restaurant will be down on the right-hand side. And sure enough, I'm driving down this, little highway, and there's the restaurant. And as I'm pulling in, I get another vision. And the vision is I'm seeing myself walk in the restaurant, and the host come up to me and says, how many? And I said, just one. And I said, then in the vision, I said, but I'm going to be sitting right there. And I pointed to my left. And the vision stopped. So I got out of my car, and I thought, wonder if this is going to happen. So I walked up, and sure enough, there's the hostess that was in the vision. I mean, same girl, same look and everything. I even remember the little podium they had. I saw the podium in the vision. Of course, I was a little bit excited then because everything in the vision was accurate. And so she came up to me and said that, how many? And I said one. And so I turned to point to my left, and I said, no, I'll be sitting right there. And there was a man sitting over there. And so I walked over. I was a little bit nervous then because I didn't know the rest of the vision, and that's one thing I've learned about the Lord. First, believe in every word that he tells you. It will get you to your destination, as he told me driving there. And the other is believe his visions that he gives you. And so I walked over there, and as I was walking to the table, this strange thing happened. It's like I had this power to show up around me. It felt like a ring of power. And as I walked up to the table, that power hit this man, and he started shaking as I walked up. And then I knew that this is a real visitation. It's something different that the Lord wants to show me. And I said, do you mind if I sit down here? And he started to growl. He wasn't himself. He turned into a different person. Like a spirit, and he grit his teeth at me, and he said yes. And so I sat down, and this spirit started to talk to me, and I was just, at first I couldn't contain everything that this thing was telling me because I just couldn't believe I was sitting in a restaurant listening to a spirit talk to me through this human being, because I had not seen this kind of stuff in years since I was a little boy during the charismatic movement. And so this spirit had to tell me all of the things it does to get into a person, how they trick the mind to get into a being, to be able to control them. And they were telling me all these crazy secrets and how they twist thoughts and twist truths and so forth to make it sound like, it's okay, or make it sound like it's God. And I was just amazed. And I had my little pad with me. This time I had a little pad, and I was writing some notes down. And I noticed even around us when people were walking by, and some of the waiters were walking by, it's like nobody was paying us any attention. I was totally stunned. Being young and not even knowing what's going on, it's kind of shocking. It's like you entered into a twilight zone. And then the spirit would shut down, and the man would come back. He would be his real person, And then he looked at me like with tears starting to roll out of his eyes, and he asked me, he goes, "Oh Lord," he said, "what is this?" And I said, "This is a spirit that's been controlling your life." And then suddenly another spirit would take over him, and then he'd turn into another spirit. And this happened for probably 30 minutes, where these spirits that were controlling this man would take over, but they would have to actually tell me their underworld type secrets of how they manipulate man. And it's really through kind of a sorcery of manipulative words that are mixed with truth, and it sounds like wisdom, but it's not wisdom at all. It's wisdom that's from beneath. It's very sensual, and we allow these things to come into our minds, and we think it's okay. It's not that big of a deal, but it is a huge deal, because it's the little foxes that spoil our vine. And they will speak just little things that sound like truth, but be twisted a bit, and we'll end up taking it in, and that fox gets in our garden or in our vineyard, and it starts draining us of what God has put on us, and then it starts filling us with all their poison. And I learned so much about how the underworld tricks man during those 30 minutes than I have ever reading the Bible or praying. I've never had that kind of encounter that the Lord allowed me to have on that day. It shocked me. I'm still remembering some of those moments because I couldn't get it all in. I just had to write notes. And so after it was over, his face turned back. This was after the third one. His face turned back to this, normal man, and he was crying. He said, "You've got to help me." And I looked at him and I said, "All you need is God." He said, "Who is God?" And I said, "Well, I tell you what." I said, when you get back to your hotel," which that was another thing. I didn't realize I was in the spirit, and I knew where he was staying. And I said, "When you get back to your hotel," I said, "sit down on your bed and ask who he is, and he will tell you." And for some reason, the Lord wouldn't let me do anything at that moment. I guess this man had to really encounter God for himself to get rid of some of this stuff. And of course, he could have encountered him there, but, you got to do what the Lord tells you to do. Let the Lord encounter him. So I wanted to help him so bad, but I know the Lord could help him better than me. And so I left, and the next day, I went to go play golf. I had another day to play. And after I get finished playing, of course, I shot a bad score. I was teeing off early again because I'd played horrible. And nobody was playing with me. Boy, that was humbling. So I turned, I'm putting my bag in my trunk, and I get a tap on my shoulder. And I turn around, and it's that man. First of all, I realized, I thought about this later. How in the world did he know where I was? God had to tell him, because I didn't tell him where I was. I didn't tell him, basically who I was. I just was called to be there and listen to him. And I turned around, and there he was, and his face was almost shining white. And he had this smile on his face, and he had these glassy eyes, like there were tears coming out of his eyes, but they weren't rolling down his face. It's like his eyes glowed with tears. It was just filled with water. And he had this smile on his face, like something that happened to him. And I knew I knew something. I knew the Lord had come to him. And I said, well, what did he say? I looked at him, I smiled, I said, what did he say? He said, you wouldn't believe it. I said, yeah, I would. And he said, I went back to my hotel and I sat down on my bed and I asked, who are you? And he said, this audible voice, he said it was a real voice in my hotel room. It said, I am the I am. And he said, when he said that, these things, he said, didn't say spirits, he said, these things came out of my body and I felt completely free. And man, that still makes me want to tear up, because if you saw this man before, he was so demonic. I mean, so oppressed. God, it was terrible. I mean, it broke my heart to see this man demonized like this. And at that point, I couldn't do anything about it. I had so much compassion on him. Probably some of it was pity, but I had a lot of compassion for him. But now this man was clean, I mean, and free. And I said, looked at him, and I started crying, and he was crying, and I grabbed him, and we hugged each other on the, in the parking lot there. He said, I know who God is now. He said, that's all I need. I said, that's all we all need is the Lord. He walked off. That was it. I ended up giving him my phone number, and we kept in contact for a little while. He was down visiting, and I think on vacation or something, and he ended up going back home. And man, when he got home, I mean, hell broke out against him. It's like those demons did not want him to stay free. And they just did everything they could to just ransack his life after God had freed him. When he got home, he walked in, and all of the pipes in the basement of his house just exploded, and it flooded the whole basement. And he called me, and he goes, this is the strangest thing. He said, they've busted my pipes and flooded my basement. He goes, but I know who these spirits are. He said, and I'm not going to let it bother me anymore. He said, I used to have a lot of rage and anger because of them, and he said, I couldn't even get mad. I knew that the enemy was trying to do this just to get back inside of me. And we laughed over the phone and carried on, and he got the pipes fixed, and he got his house back, and he had a couple more things that the enemy, went after him with, but he just kept hanging on to the Lord because he had a real encounter. And that's the thing about it these days. We have really got to have a real encounter with God. If you have just one encounter, it will last the rest of your life. It's not like you'll walk perfect, but you just, that type of encounter with God, it puts a standard in your life to where if you do mess up, you've got to get back quickly. There are some things that God delivers you of, like this man, and once you're delivered of it, you can't go back. If you do go back and knowing that God delivered you and you go back to those old things, it becomes 7 times worse. And the thing about it is this man knew it. He knew if he went back after having a deliverance encounter with God, it would have gotten a lot worse. And that man hung on. And man, I was so happy. I can't tell you how happy I was for this man. I was so happy that the Lord did it. I was a little bit worried that the Lord wouldn't show up, and but for that man to get information to where I was playing golf just stunned me. I'm sure he probably got the same type of instruction as I did going to the restaurant, I mean, he was taught by the Lord how to get there. And that's the thing with God, with that one encounter, I knew that anytime you're going to get to a destination, first the Lord's going to show you. The next, he's going to give you instruction, as he did with me. You know, the first time I got the vision of my destination, which was the restaurant, and then I just set out to go for it. And as I went for it, the Lord started speaking to me and started giving me instruction, telling me, you know, which street to turn on, you know, or turn left or turn right. You know, and that's biblical. Of course, back then, I didn't know all of that stuff was biblical. You know, don't look to your right or to your left, but listen to the voice that's behind you, and he will guide you. And I was literally living those things out, but I had no idea that those things were in the Bible until he started actually showing me. I'd have to go to the context of the Bible just to find the chapter of where he was saying to turn to. I remember he said one time, he said, Brad, he said, nothing can separate us from one another. He said, but there is one thing that can separate us, and it's your will. And he said, it's your carnal mind. And when I speak, your carnal mind is going to manifest and try to reason every word that comes out of my mouth. And I said, where is that, Lord? He said, it's in Romans 8:7. And so I grabbed my Bible and I started turning to the front to look for where Romans was and the pages. And so I found Romans, and I turned over to Romans 8, found the chapter. And sure enough, it said, you know, the carnal mind is at enmity with God. Doesn't even want to understand God's ways. And man, I would get so excited because I didn't know the Bible, so the Lord would have to tell me, you know, where to turn to. And he'd have to tell me the chapters and, you know, and where it was. And it was such a fun moment because it was like I was getting fathered by the Lord himself. And for a while there, I thought, you know, this is normal. But I tried to tell someone later on that was a Christian, and they thought I was crazy. I'll never forget when I came back from that trip. I was so excited because I just got trained by the Lord, and I'd met this man. This supernatural encounter had just happened. You know, I got to learn how the enemy tricks man, and I was able to have some, you know, ammo to be and discernment to be able to decipher, you know, what is God and what's the enemy just by listening to God. And I get back to the church and I've got this huge smile on my face. I mean, I can't tell you how excited I was. And these elders got around me. It's like they corralled me, you know, and they were elders. And they walked up to me and they said, "You look like you're a new believer." I said, "Actually, no." I said, I just love Jesus. I like walking with him. He's just so awesome. You wouldn't believe. It's just great to walk with God every day. And of course, I'm literally meaning that because I'm literally having these encounters. And of course, I still mean that today because every day you can have a real encounter with God. It doesn't have to be as big as I just had to go through with that man, but every day is an opportunity to be able to walk with God, not for him. If you're walking for him, you're never going to be able to feel him there because you're in a works mode. Your mind is thinking about doing something for him instead of walking with him and partnering with him. When you're walking with him, you're conscious of something else being there with you. But if you're working for him, your consciousness thinks that he's far off and you're having to get there, which your senses and everything go dull and hard and you can't feel the presence of the Lord. And so I said, "No, you wouldn't believe it. Jesus is awesome. I've been walking with him a few days." And after I finished, I had this huge smile on my face. They looked at me and they had this old snub look. I'm sure some of you out there probably had a few snub looks, you know, Christian snubs. And they just looked at me and turned their nose up. And they said, well, this is just a honeymoon, and it'll end soon, and then you can start becoming mature. And I looked at them, and and I was serious, because I wasn't trying to be rebellious or anything. I looked at them and I said, no, it's nothing like that. This is maturity. I said, we can live with Jesus. We can walk with him. He can talk with us. We can introduce him to everybody. And man, I'm going to tell you what, it's like, you talk about demons. I got to learn where a lot of demons were. They were in the elders of the church, I thought. And a lot of them, a lot of the enemy was there at the church. I didn't encounter a whole lot in people that were outside the church, to be honest with you. Of course, Satan's always trying to set up his kingdom and his throne in the temple of God, And if there's anything, we need to cast out Satan in God's temple, where he has gotten in and has twisted not only his word and used the doctrines of men instead of doctrines of God. And we've got to kick that guy out, because we've had a lot of things that have been twisted in the church that has really caused people to be hurt. They've caused people to go astray. And we really need Jesus, to start being our teacher again. Of course, the Bible says that we're going to behold our teacher. And that actually is true. I got to literally behold my teacher, and he teach me. And we think that that's going to be down the road, but that is for now. Every word of God, is eternal. And you can step into that realm at any point. You just got to start asking for it, that the Lord would lead you into these realms of his word. Because every word of God has all these different realms of heaven that it will take you to. So that's the last story. That's number 3, I think, God's story, isn't it? So don't forget, let the Lord lead you. Now listen to his words. You wouldn't believe where he'll lead you. If he tells you to go somewhere and you think it should play out a certain way, just don't even think it that way. Don't start thinking ahead of yourself and start thinking it should play out like this. I remember the Lord moving me to the mountains, and when he told me to move to the mountains, I thought, there's hardly anybody up there, I started evaluating, well, you got to have relationships, and started mixing it up with what he told me. And I started evaluating if it was the Lord or not. And man, when I just said, forget this, I'm going to listen to him. And I moved up there. I had some of the greatest relationships that I could have ever had when I moved up there. So when the Lord tells you to do something, listen, don't mix it with your opinion. It just muddies it up. And listen, when you get there, when you get to your destination or to your destiny where the Lord has told you to go, that's just the beginning. That's when you'll sit and you will be taught new things from the Lord when you get there. Getting to your destination or your destiny is not the end, and that's not the crescendo. That's when there are times when you get to your destiny, you sit and you rest for a while, and you get to be taught by the Lord. But many people do not get there because they choose on their way, either when the Lord speaks to them and tells them what to do, they either don't do it and do not cross over into that place of faith, or some people start heading toward their destiny, trying to listen to the Lord, hearing his word, and then they get halfway out there and they encounter either roughness or they encounter doubt because he hasn't spoken, completely yet, and they turn around and go back, and they never make it to their destination. But there are some that will listen to his word and they will make it to their destiny and to their destination. But that's not the end. That's not the crescendo of your life. Listen, after we leave here, there's going to be millions, trillions of destinations that we'll go to. Because even after this, we go from glory to glory. Here we go from glory to glory. If you die, you go from glory to glory. There are different dimensions that you end up walking in. Because we have a forerunner in heaven that is still doing what he did today. The Lord's not just sitting up there not doing anything. He's resting in his Father's total will. He's totally possessed by the will of his Father. And he's still foregoing. He's still forerunning for us. That's what is pulling a lot more people in the kingdom. Because our Lord is still forerunning for us. And I don't know if you've ever followed anybody in your life, but when you have a forerunner that keeps going and keeps pressing through into the Lord, it challenges you to keep going right behind them. Hey, I want this. I want to keep going. That's the way the Lord is. So his glory and his power is still, it pulls us into the kingdom. It causes us to have to want to be there with him, want to go through the trials, and want to go through the long suffering to actually get to where the Lord is. So just keep going. Don't give up. If the Lord's told you something, just keep walking. Don't get out there and start doubting it. Don't turn around and go back to your old familiar self or your old familiar destination. All right. Well, that's God's story number 3. I hope you enjoyed it. I do enjoy these things because I start remembering some of the things that truly happened back then. Some of these things I've forgotten. And it's bringing a lot of stuff up that it's even teaching me even more. So I appreciate you tuning in, and we'll see you next Tuesday at 7 o'clock. We love you. All right. Talk to you later. Have a good day. Bye-bye.